Your living room is the factory. The product being manufactured is you.
I'm Samuel Totten, and you're watching Fayetteville Public Access Television.
Hi, with us today is Quinn Montana. Quinn, how are you?
Good. Good.
Now, you've recently published a book called Worship Your Food.
Yes.
That's kind of an interesting title. I want to ask you, what led you to write this book?
Well, actually, I have been involved and interested in eating organic food, eating healthy food for as long as I can remember. And there's certainly, I didn't invent the movement. People like Helen and Scott Nearing in the 30s, Rachel Carson wrote about what's happening in our environment in the 50s.
Right.
In the 70s, there was a huge movement of people who wanted to go back to the land and eat pure foods. And at that time, and I was influenced heavily by the 70s, of course, I still felt that it really wasn't coming across to people how important it is that we really consider, and it's what's going on with our food and how much worse it's gotten even from their time, from Rachel Carson's time and the 70s. And in the 90s, I finally, in 2003 actually is when I began the book, I just thought it was, I don't know how other people write, I've never been a writer before, but I was so compelled that I just really couldn't not write it.
So a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to go in the grocery store and push my cart around. Food's food. What the hell is she talking about? But you talk a lot about how attitudes toward food have changed a lot, like in the last 20 to 30 years.
I think we are really influenced and manipulated by, well, research shows that we are intentionally being manipulated by the big multinational conglomerates that are creating the things that are going into our food nowadays. I mean, I talk about, and Eric Schlosser pointed this out with his book, McDonald's doing flyovers of areas in the 60s to know where schools were, so they would know where to put their fast food places. So it's not
kind of like a military operation.
Very much so. And then later everybody started doing that, and they designed entire neighborhoods that way with an eye towards how to get people to spend the way they wanted them to spend. And when you really realize that we think that we're making independent choices, and we're really not. It's not pushing your cart around through a bunch of healthy food, even as I talk about the food that's in the grocery store that looks like real food. One of the things I use is decoy food, because it's almost as if we are looking at a lake edge and there are some real ducks and they're kind of out further, and then there's some decoy ducks bobbing in the swamp nearby, and we just think to ourselves, those are easier to get, let's just get those wooden ones, and we're eating those. We are eating stuff that is convenient but not real.
Well, you talk about how people's attitudes towards food have changed over the last few decades too.
We've become convinced that we cannot cook our own food.
You talk about how we're the first generation to be like the first fast food generation.
Right. There's this constant media manipulation to get us to believe, first of all, that men don't cook, and that historically has really not been the case in most cultures and nearly all cultures, and then also that now we're being fed the idea over the last several decades that women really can't cook, don't have time, don't know how, it's too hard, and baking bread, gosh, I better get a bread machine, to do that at the very least, and it's really not hard. None of it is really rocket science. It's pleasurable, and I kind of want people to rethink that.
So You talk about natural, and some people think, okay, I'm going to go in the health food store, or I'm going to go like to Harps or IGA or Walmart and go in their natural food section. Mm-hmm. It's like you're in the ocean surrounded by sharks, and you go to this island. Are you really safe going to this island because it says health food, healthy? Are you particularly safe just going there?
And no, never turn off your brain. You know, you go to a health food store, and just because it's a health food store doesn't mean everything in there is healthy. There are organic guidelines that are constantly trying to be manipulated by the pharmaceutical, chemical, agricultural companies, industries, and it's something that the consumer has to be attuned to. You know, but it's not difficult. It's buy real stuff, buy the components of the food and make it yourself rather than buying a packaged thing. If you're, Michael Pollan has talked about this, if the ingredients are more than 20 words long, don't even bother. I mean, those are not things that you need to have.
Right. There's just actually still a lot of sugar in a lot of health food stuff too.
A lot of sugar, things that people still are trying to buy convenience foods. And the word natural doesn't really mean anything. Everything is natural.
There's no law. There's no law that says natural has to mean this.
Yeah, and even organic. I mean, I hope I can trust a lot of organic standards because they're working on them now and they're really trying to keep them with integrity. But natural really doesn't mean anything. I mean, a chicken is natural. Even a chicken that's eating odd things, there's no guidelines to say that is not natural. So it's not a word that you can follow to feel that you're really getting quality food.
You talk about fruits. People think they're healthy just going in and buying fruits and vegetables. But you had some disturbing information about that.
Fruits and vegetables too have changed over the decades. They've, for one thing, gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, an orange is now the size of a grapefruit the size of a cantaloupe the size of a watermelon, and a watermelon the size of a baby swine. You know, there's really just this gigantism that's happening, and yet the nutrient density of those foods hasn't changed at all. In fact, it's gotten less because of the soil that they're growing in and the water that's got toxins in it. But the inherent nutrient density still doesn't expand corresponding to the size of the food. Yeah. So if you get an orange this big, you're still having the same amount of nutrients as you would if you had an orange this big.
Right.
And so it doesn't really, and you have more flavor actually with the smaller products most of the time, because the flavor is also watered down or dispersed with these giant, larger products. And so it's fruits and vegetables, organic. I mean, really organic is the best way to go with anything that you're getting, in the sense that to the best that we can ascertain, those things are held to a standard that's higher. And that means that they're not saturated with chemicals in the process of being grown, and that their soil is not treated with toxins and pesticides, and they're probably smaller. And frankly, if the bugs like them, I feel safer with that. I don't want something that's all buggy, but if there's a couple of insects have taken a nibble, I feel like, well, at least I know that, it's not sterile. The whole food isn't.
Aren't they sort of enhancing the color on some of these fruits too?
They do use dyes and stuff in the skins of oranges, for instance.
And strawberries.
I'm not familiar with the dyes in strawberries, but I'm sure that there are people that do that. They do in meat. Yeah. They use food coloring in meat, and they use nitrogen or carbon dioxide or something in
strawberries.
Packaging. Yeah, I don't want to say for certain, but it wouldn't surprise me. But they do things to our food so that we can no longer use our senses to judge whether the food is good quality anymore. You buy a package of meat and it could have been irradiated, and so it will last so much longer than nature would have it naturally last, and it's bright red even though it's been on the shelf for days and days and days. In fact, there are examples of foods that have been sent back because they had gone past their still fresh date and then sent out and irradiated again and put back out on the shelves. And those are the kind of things that are just become really frightening.
Oh, we wonder why people have so many stomach problems and colon problems in this country.
Exactly. And we have become complacent about the fact that they do, because when it becomes, there's kind of, to my mind, a tipping point. At a certain point when the population is suffering from things, we look around and we think, well, it must be normal. Everyone has that. And yet it's not. And in fact, so we talk about overweight. I mentioned a woman in there who on a blog site that I was reading said, well, the whole average weight has really actually gone up, so now we should think of that as average. And that's a fallacy of logic, and I don't know enough about that kind of thing to describe it for you, but I know that it's wrong thinking, because we should still, human beings should still be a certain size, and you don't shift that just because everyone has gotten heavier. And really, we've gotten heavier in a remarkably brief period of time as well.
I was watching Bill Maher on HBO a few weeks ago, and he was talking about on Barnum and Bailey's Circus, how the Fat Man, people pay money to go see the Fat Man, right? And the guy weighed less than 300 pounds. I mean, today you imagine the Fat Man, you're thinking about a guy who weighs 700 pounds, but the guy weighed about 300 pounds.
Yeah.
You know? I mean,
yeah.
That's pretty shocking. When you see commercials on TV, and you see, I saw CC's Pizza commercial last night, or you see Hardee's or wherever you running out getting the thick burger or whatever, and they're always sleek, attractive models, right? And in real life, when you see the people coming in and out of the restaurants, they're really not sleek, attractive models. I mean, the people who habitually go to restaurants every day. Maybe unless they're going to the gym 6 hours a day.
We have a lot of issues with overweight in this country, and I'm not watching who's going in and out of the restaurants, but it is true that the majority of our culture, we are facing an obesity epidemic, and part of that, a lot of that, come to simply accept it, and those foods. We don't think of food as in terms of our health anymore.
Yeah.
If we do go on a diet, and I'm not espousing any particular diet here, because it's not about how you look.
Right.
What I want is for people to think of food in terms of how it makes them feel.
Right.
And we've completely lost sight of that. People don't eat really in terms of if it makes them feel bad when they've eaten something like pizza from the pizza joint, then they take a pill. And it's just horrifying. It's like your body's trying to tell you not to eat that.
Like people taking antacids after they eat, right?
Yeah, and we give them to children nowadays.
Yeah.
Just because we expect a certain level of discomfort after we eat, which is so wrong.
Right.
It's, we shouldn't be feeling bad. We should be feeling better when we eat, and we should eat. We should then choose to eat food and eat food that we recognize does make us feel better. But it's a hump to get over. It's a transition to get there.
When the government often seems to be in a position of not really helping people out so much, but helping out industry.
I totally agree.
As promoting their interests.
Right. Well, the lobbyists in Washington and the food industry money is just going a long way towards, at the very least, obfuscation. The idea that we can confuse people, that we can sort of just make it seem so difficult and overwhelming. And I think that they have conveyed that message, that we get into the grocery store and we think, oh, it's just all too hard.
Yeah.
And then we're taught over and over again that it is all too hard. You shouldn't have to think about it. Just eat this. Just trust us. But they're making money off of it. One of the things that did prompt me to write the book, and that as I went along, felt more and more strongly about, is that people should realize that the same companies, the same pharmaceutical, chemical, agricultural companies who are creating the pesticides and the toxins that are going into our water, that are going into our soil, that are going into our animals, those same companies have a branch, an arm, they're all tied in though, are the ones making the medicines, the medications that then they feed us when we become ill from getting those foods in the first place. And so they are making money at both ends of the equation.
Right.
And I want to bring that to people's attention, because that is wrong. And that it's one of those follow the money things. And when you see it on both sides, it's really horrifying. You think this is not a coincidence.
It's kind of like a tobacco company getting involved in nicotine patches.
Well, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And very much like the tobacco companies in that for decades they have fought against the scientific proof that those few people working to bring it to our attention are saying these foods are bad for us. Right now,
Right.
GMO foods and Monsanto are really, there are journalists who are bringing to light certain things, and there have been journalists who have lost their jobs for bringing things to light
Yeah.
because the media was owned by the companies who don't want that to be known.
Right.
And so the food isn't safe. I feel like because I am someone who is not tied to, I'm not a journalist, I'm not tied to academia, I am not someone who has the constraints that many of the other writers. That was something else about my book, is that I didn't really have to mince words.
Yeah.
I can say, look, that food isn't safe.
Right.
And I believe that.
Yeah.
And I really, really make an effort not to eat it. Now, do I not eat any of it ever? No. I mean, say no, I don't not. If I'm going to someone's wedding or a party or something, I don't stand there and go,
It's all right.
"Ew."
Everybody falls from grace occasionally.
Well, I think you have to allow yourself to participate in the world, but I really
Right.
do try to maintain a 90-10 balance in my food and in my life. The food that
Yeah.
I cook and take care of for myself, organic food.
Yeah.
And very little meat, but organic meat.
Right. It seems like, now talking about the media, of course, there's a lot of stuff, I mean, they try to be objective, I suppose they try to be objective, just won't touch. We're talking about, let alone the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, there's a lot of stuff they won't touch because I think advertising dollars, you
Right,
know.
right.
And so they sort of skim around the edges.
You often hear this may be bad, or there's some question as to whether this is good for you or not, or.
But then they'll get somebody from the industry to come on and tell you how good it is.
Right, or as
Yeah.
soon as they say something may be bad, they'll have the other side come in and give the opposing argument, which
Right.
just leaves people to think, well, who knows?
Yeah.
These are the experts.
Right.
And one of my messages is that no, you are the expert. You really are the expert. Your body knows, and you just have to take a breath and realize that the food that you're eating is of the utmost importance to not only your own health. I mean, we have such an increased incidence of asthma and allergies and cancers
And
and
diabetes.
autoimmune diseases, diabetes, and not just in adults or people getting older, but in young children. That it's just one of the analogies that I was coming up with recently, or thought of recently, it's kind of like our cells are made out of the food that we eat, and
Yeah.
then therefore our children are made out of
Right.
the food that we eat. And if the food that we eat, if the cattle is being fed plastic pellets, for instance, and of course, even if you're a vegetarian, there's toxins in things. Even if you're organic in our world today, there are toxins in the environment
Right.
that are so pervasive that organic food has some level of that.
Yeah.
But if we're eating meat that comes from a cow that has been fed plastic pellets and cement dust, then that's what our cells are being made out of. But then also that is what we are making our children out of. And so it's as if we are making our children out of cheap plastic parts, just the way that we've been manufacturing things for the last several decades. And when you think of it that way, it's like they're breaking down and falling apart, just the way all those cheap plastic appliances have been doing.
And sort of a patronizing approach too that a lot of companies choose. They treat you like children in their approach to advertising food or talking about food on TV or the radio.
They're really trying to convince us that we are not the experts, that we don't have the scientific knowledge to really understand the complexities of diet and what our body's needs are. And frankly, I don't think they do either. There's work that needs to be done in understanding synergy in foods and the way things act with one another, not just foods
Right.
themselves, but the chemicals that are going into foods. We don't even understand how, just recently, just last year or so, they figured out how aspirin works. It's been on the market for 70, 80 years. And widely promoted and used, and we never knew how chemically it was really doing what it did. The studies haven't even been done when it comes to things like various chemicals that are being compiled. They study one in isolation, and they don't study all the rest of them. But the bottom line is, that's not important for the person who's eating. What's important is to know that the purer your food is, you don't even have to worry about all those things. You don't have to worry about all those chemicals. Just eat real food. Just eat plain, good food.
Speaking of studies, one of the things you're talking about is sugar. And talking about a lot of people running to sugar now rather than high fructose corn syrup.
Right. High fructose corn syrup has gotten a lot of attention in the last few years because of fructose was touted as being something that was better for you, more able to be utilized by people who are diabetic, for instance, as opposed to sugar because of the way fructose breaks down as opposed to glucose.
There's fructose in everything. They put high fructose corn syrup.
Well,
Campbell's puts in tomato soup. Why do you need high fructose corn syrup in tomato soup?
Why do you need sugar in a lot of these things? You just don't even need to have sugar in it. I prefer ketchup, for instance, doesn't need to have sugar. My peanut butter doesn't have sugar in it. But we become accustomed to those tastes, and then those become our comfort foods, and we also expect them to taste a certain way. So people have peanut butter without sugar in it. They think it's missing something. They even don't quite know what. But so we have to kind of become cognizant of those things and get away, recognize that the taste is an added sugar. But we also have to realize that high fructose corn syrup is everything they say, not good, because it's, first of all, genetically modified corn in order to get that much of the quantity of that high fructose corn syrup. It's also really, they're more and more doing studies finding out that it promotes weight gain in other ways that they were not aware of when they initially were touting it. And things like even agave nectar can be just like high fructose corn syrup, depending on how it's processed, because it's a fructose and it's made to be more dense and more sweet than it would be normally if it were just in nature. If you just have plain corn syrup that's just squeezed out of the corn, however they do that, that is not nearly as bad for you as high fructose corn syrup, which has gone through some kind of process to sort of intensify its detrimental aspects. But then people think of sugar
because the person watching
as
this
being
now
okay.
They're grabbing a wheelbarrow now and they're throwing everything in the wheelbarrow, throwing everything out of their house that has high fructose corn syrup, and they're saying, okay,
but sugar's
Mom,
good.
let's go to the store and just get sugar. That's I see, and you see now soft drinks. They say sugar, no corn syrup.
Right. What we have to realize is that we just have too much sugar in general, too much of any kinds of sugar, and even like stevia is an alternative that people are beginning to use, and you just use a little teeny speck of it, and it's amazingly sweet. It comes from a plant, which all of these things. It comes from a plant that at this point hasn't been too tampered with. They just dry it out, I guess. And yet, why put stevia in things? To my mind, it doesn't need to be sweetened. We have to lose some of our taste for sweet. It does go back to being treated like babies and allowing ourselves to continue to live in that state of infants, like everything to be either salty or sweet and not a lot of spice in them. But typically, historically, adults cultivated spicier things, and I think it would be an exciting prospect to see people begin to experiment with those kinds of things again and develop a more adult palate and get back to enjoying some of the things that are out there.
We don't want to do without spices.
Right.
I mean, do without sugar. We wouldn't want to do without spices.
No, I'm saying we should find out more about spices. What we're doing is that we have lost all spice in our foods except for salt and sugar. And I think that
they're the ones that are the worst for you.
And the other ones were developed because the tastes of tart, the tastes of spicy, not just necessarily hot, but piquant and various, other kinds of flavors that different cultures add to their foods. American food is typically bland, very bland.
For God's sake, we fought wars over spices thousands of years ago. At least we could do the honor of those dead people just to use more spices.
I think that there's a whole adventure out there for people who want to get into learning about different spices. I've started getting into Middle Eastern spices recently and really enjoying that.
Talking about food itself, you talk about how food sizes have changed, food portions. And like a Coke bottle used to be 6.5 ounces.
6 ounces. I think it was 6
Yeah,
ounces.
in the olden days, back in the olden days. Yeah.
For 40 years.
Back in the days when you got a Coke as on a special occasion when you were a kid.
Right, right.
Nowadays, a special occasion is when the half hour.
Yeah. And nowadays, a soda drink could be up to 32 ounces. That, you know, I think they're even larger.
It's brunch. Need a Red Bull.
Woo-wee.
Yeah,
Yeah, sugar, caffeine, the added caffeine that's extracted from something and put into the drink, and then carbonation even itself is a little bit, it's not that good for you actually.
You get a soda bottle now, even a diet soda, and it says on the side, which very few people actually read that on the side, but on top it says servings 2. Even if you get a Diet Coke, it says 2 servings.
Really?
You're drinking the whole bottle because
Absolutely, that's what everyone
it's a
does.
Diet Coke, I'm doing okay, but it's 2 servings.
Right. Well, and that's a soda.
Yeah.
But if you're drinking one of these giant ones, that's a party's worth. And, you know, for an entire group of people, that's really not, and people drink that.
I know people drink the whole 2 liter.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And it's, I think one of the impetuses for the book was to really get people to recognize how much that's harming them.
Yeah.
A bad approach in so many ways, but the whole supersizing of our food.
That's a fun thing. That's kind of like fun, like dancing on top of broken glass when you're don't have any shoes on. This is kind of fun. You have a chart here that you got from another source, and you talk about how things have changed from 20 years ago, right? And just getting a cheeseburger, right? I'll just get a cheeseburger. That's what I used to get when I was a kid. But there's like almost 300 more calories today in a cheeseburger. Absolutely. And talk about French fries, where you get, there's 400 extra calories because there's 400, there's 400 extra calories because the portion size is bigger. You talk about a turkey sandwich. Oh, a turkey sandwich, that's healthy
That
for
seems like it's going to be healthy, right?
But it's 10 inches long because and there's the bread, right? You know, so go to a modern sandwich shop and you're getting this huge turkey sandwich, right? Or a cookie. Cookie used to be 1.5 inches in diameter.
Cookies were this big when I was a kid. That was like,
now
you
it's
know,
5 inches in diameter, right?
Nowadays, this is a cookie, and people will buy this and give it to their child.
Yeah, and
like,
they wonder why their kids are porking out.
And are hyperactive and are, you know, having diabetes at the age of 10 or 12, right. and hormone problems.
Not to mention buffets, you know.
Right,
When I was married, you know, my wife and I discovered buffets together, you know. That's it's a real romantic thing. You get that buffet at noon and not have to leave till 9 o'clock at night. You know? That's true. My weight went from 175 to 250 in about 7 months. You know?
That will do it to you. The thing is that it's just other cultures sometimes. Other cultures have a sense of that food. That there's a level of obscenity if you're eating something that is so monstrous that it's a giant mound on your plate. It just becomes, it's gauche. It's
which is a nice segue into something you talked about in your book called Man versus Food.
The television show.
Which is a sort of fascinating thing you talked about in your book, a TV show.
Well, it's the epitome of the ugly American. And yet it's a guy who goes around, I don't know if the show's still on the air, but it was a guy who goes around and visits in different cities all of these places that encourage you to just wallow in food and eat as many, like at one point I saw one episode, I believe, and it was like a burger that was the size of
It was a 7-pound burger. It was a 7-pound burger.
And he tried to eat it all and couldn't, but the whole show was about him shoving this food down himself, and he was making himself sick, even just because of the amount of it, not to mention what was in the meat and the
he had several
sugar
sides.
in the bun and all that. He didn't even
just,
touch the sides, but yes, he was given the sides with it. And in this restaurant, the show is awful enough, just who would want to even watch that, but that's what that restaurant is pushing, and that's what many restaurants are pushing. Eat it, eat more, how much, and it's grotesque. And culturally, Michael Pollan talks about, I can't remember, I mentioned it in the book at some point, but the phrase that the Japanese use, that mothers tell their children, and it's kind of a manners thing in Japan historically. It says, stop eating when there's still 20% left for you to feel full.
Well, doesn't it take like 20 minutes for your stomach to feel the food?
It does.
you've
So,
eaten?
and
Yeah.
that's the reason for that, is that because if you fill up, then a little while later you feel sluggish.
People
and
don't
you
believe
feel
that.
overly
People
full.
think you have to eat. People think you have to eat till you're full.
We've lost touch with recognizing how our body should feel. And so we then, 20 minutes later, when we feel ill, then we take a pill.
Yeah.
And so the whole cycle's thrown out of whack.
Yeah, people really don't. You try to tell people that, they really don't believe you. So people
Right.
eat for 20 minutes. You know.
And likewise in France, in other parts of Europe, small portions were typically the norm because it was gauche. It was
Yeah.
considered inappropriate as a hog, as a pig, as someone who went back for thirds. And in our culture, that's encouraged. And it's encouraged not because we are inherently Americans more gauche or piggish than other cultures. I really think that it's being encouraged by the companies who are
For Jack's special, for breakfast,
but by
and you
the
get a plate as
but
big
the
as this
media
table.
and who are then paid
Right.
for by the companies who are making the
Right.
chemicals want us to consume more. We're a consuming society.
Right.
We're a capitalist society that depends on the production and consumption, and so we're part of the machine of eating more and more and more because that's going to make more of a profit for somebody. But that's not. People need to become aware of that,
Right.
and that shouldn't be our goal in eating.
So how can people change? How can people say, well, enough's enough? How do I change my life?
To recognize it is the first thing. To really become aware of some of these things. Not to beat oneself up and say, I have been being the lumberjack because, I don't know, I never thought about it, and I do go back and have thirds, and I like those buffets. I'm not out to condemn people who are doing that. What I'm trying to do is to say, recognize that you are being encouraged to do this. That someone's standing behind you going, eat, 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 eat.
Yeah.
And that isn't necessarily a good thing for you. And they don't care about you. They care about the profit margin. So
a lot of people convince themselves that they love to eat, and so because if they love to eat, they have to eat a lot.
And that's absolutely not true. I mean, if you really love your food, you can enjoy really exquisite small quantities of things and not end up feeling ill afterwards, but savor the tastes. Just ideas to make mealtime more fun, or to have parties in which people might have an event that would be kind of like a wine tasting, but a food tasting,
Right.
and to really have people come and, it's playful, it's
Right.
fun, but to have them think about smelling the food, describing the smell, the bouquet, and then looking at the arrangement, the colors, and just really knowing our food. We inhale our food as we're going to our next important, exciting thing, and we disregard the importance of the very most important thing in our lives, I think.
Well, speaking of exciting things, my director just threw a chair at the door. He's reminding us that our time is almost up for the day.
Okay.
So,
Well, I
Quinn,
could go on and on, but thank you for having me
well,
for
I want
this.
to thank you very much for being on the show today.
All right. Well, I appreciate
And,
it, Richard.
I want to thank you all for being on the show today. I want to thank you all for watching, and I want you all to grab a wheelbarrow and throw the bad food out of your house, and we'll see you next week.
I'm Samuel Totten, and you're watching Fayetteville Public Access Television.
Your living room is the factory. The product being manufactured is you.
Gather around and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. Boom! The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. The minnow would be lost. The ship's aground on the shore of this uncharted desert isle, with Gilligan, the skipper too, the 1%er and his wife, the movie star, the man of science, Marianne, here on Gilligan's Island. So here's the story of our castaways. They're here for a long, long time. They'll have to... What? They're still there? Oh, this is stupid. Flint, you told me if I came in this week I could do Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. That's it. I'm out of here. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm leaving, and I'm taking my chair with me.
Yet another love song. We'd like to share as many as we can. It's actually a takeoff from a song. At first it'll sound really familiar to you, probably. Maybe. Depends on your age, I guess. We think that it'll sound familiar to many of you. But really it was one of those songs that when you really started listening to the words, you were kind of like, it was really not very real. So we took this song and we turned the words around a little bit and changed it to make it just slightly more palatable to our taste. My clothing is modest, and I am hot, but I want to tell you, I am 45 years old. You get 100.
And that, the defying gravity also applies in this case.
Newsflash! Newsflash! Newsflash!
Jack Kevorkian is at it again. America's beloved suicide doctor has had his so-called suicide machine seized by authorities. But the man who kills out of kindness is undeterred. At a press conference held earlier this week, Kevorkian claimed that the loss of his machine is a small loss. I can always use a chipper shredder, he told reporters earlier today. Meanwhile, the Boy Scouts of America have rejected his proposal for the suggested new merit badge.
Speaking of poultry, which is actually a pretty cool way to do that.
Very good.
Lisa wrote a poem. The Poets of Arkansas, or
The Great Chicken Poets
the
of
Great
Arkansas.
Chicken Poets of Arkansas.
Are you ready for the Great Chicken
I'm
Poets
ready
of
for the
Arkansas?
Great Chicken Poets of Arkansas.
Let me backtrack in case anyone has joined us late. I am from San Francisco, and I drove across country and came to Arkansas actually by accident. And when I arrived in Siloam Springs at the visitor center, I had this experience recorded here in this here poem, which is a true story. It's called The Great Chicken Poets of Arkansas, or You Say Tomato and I Say Tomato. Clearly, she didn't want to be there fielding tourists at the Visitor Information Center, Siloam Springs, Arkansas. Boredom dripped out in her sighs and fingers grazing tired across the map. Here a river, there a lake, everywhere a good time. Nevertheless, she was helpful, if by rote. Miss Arkansas Information at last became inexplicably animated as I neared the exit. Tourism is very important to Arkansas. It's the #2 industry. Yes, right after poetry.
I perked clean out of my interstate days. Nobody told me poetry was big business in Arkansas. Poetry, I repeated, incredulous. Oh, yes, she puffed. Chicken, turkey, all kinds of poetry. Well, I'd just come from a cowboy poetry festival in Oklahoma, so why not chicken poetry? My informant chirped merrily, why, there's Tyson and Cargill and no doubt famous Arkansas chicken poets, I deduced. Inspired by my interest, she crowed, yep, we've got more farms than anywhere else in America. Farms? Ah. Everything I really needed to know about the Arkansas accent, I learned in that exchange with the poultry pep gal at the visitor center, Siloam Springs, Arkansas.
But you didn't turn around and go back.
No, I didn't. It really had to sink in for a while. The enormity of what I had just experienced.
Obsession. Fascination. Fetish. Fragmentation. Why are 9 out of 10 women dissatisfied with some aspect of their own bodies? The beauty industry is the beast.
Welcome. Thank you. And you know, we've had so much fun here today, and I wish you'd all put your hands together for Jan for putting this all on, the sound table and everyone. Lots of fun, lots of fun. The first song that we're going to do is one that I wrote this last, a little over a year ago. I started going through my midlife crisis or growth or whatever, and I was over Peggy's one day, and she kind of inspired me to write this song.
We were looking at there was a musical act coming to town, these 2 women that were going to be playing, and something inside me snapped. It was like the June Cleaver inside of me wanted to get a shag haircut and a pair of boots and become a bitch.
So the song is called Time for a Change. I'm gonna buy some red boots, the cowboy kind, dye my hair to match 'em and drink white wine. I'm gonna get a tattoo on the side of my hip, call in sick for the sake of it. I know my man's gonna think I'm strange. Time for change, time for change. Turn my world around, time for change. Inside of and outside down. I'm gonna learn about things that would shock my mom. Speak out about it just like my pa. I'm gonna do what I want, where and when. Find a new religion, something kind of zen. I know my man's gonna think I'm strange. Time for change, time for change. Turn my world around, time for change. Inside out and upside down.
This is called
Free Man.
Free Man. 2, 3, 4. Well, I left home as a young man, traveled down on 59, caught a ride on I-40 and I rode it on down the line. Slept on the beach at Malibu, traveled south to Mexico, ended up stuck in Seattle where the rainfall meets the snow. But I'm still a free man, yes I'm still a free man on the road to understand, yeah. But the rambling spirit hit me and the road became my way. It set loose the ties that bind me and the rules that guide my day. So here I sit, tipping book, my lady by my side. Take a dip and have another sip, just enjoy the ride, yeah. Well, I'm still a free man, yes I'm still a free man on the road to understand. So I spent some time with Uncle Sam, thought I'd ride the waves. Culture shock, watching the clock seemed to make up most of my days. Caught a ride back home to Arkansas, settled in a college town. Education gave me questions and 2 words, upward bound. But I'm still a free man, yes I'm still a free man on the road to understand. Now I'm writing poetry at a ripe old age, it seems. Mother Earth has finally spoken, filling in the color of my dreams. So here I sit, an open book, my lady by my side. So take a tip and have another sip, just enjoy the ride. I'm still a free man. Thank you.
Have any of you ever had this experience where you go out on a first date with somebody and it is hot? You know, everything clicks, you feel great, you have everything in common. You talk and talk and talk and talk and talk for hours, fiery chemistry. It's just swell. And then you go out on another date and it's just as good, and then you move in together. Well, that's at the end of the second date. Okay, and then you know, then you buy a house together, a car together, you buy some CDs together, start sharing socks, and then in about 6... My partner won't share socks. Her partner's a little compulsive, okay? Anyway, then about 6 months down the road, you realize that that other person is just sick. You know, has raunchy habits, textbook personality disorders, character flaws, in fact, has BPS, which is a new diagnosis, that's bad personality syndrome. Well, of course, the other person's probably sitting there thinking about the same thing about you, but this song is about that very important process of discovery. Lots of money, I was doing well myself. I never thought that I would ever see the day that life would be the way. I cannot wait until I find you. I have a few things to say. That promotion that you wanted, your boss gave away to me. Say, love you.
I'm Samuel Totten, and you're watching Fayetteville Public Access Television.
Your living room is the factory. The product being manufactured is you.
Politics in general and jobs that don't pay enough, 40-hour work weeks, books full of boring stuff, schools that should teach but kids don't learn a thing. These are a few of my least favorite things. Healthcare that won't heal and how people treat the earth, paying tolls and taxes, disbelief in self-worth, bitter cold winters that cut into spring. These are a few of my least favorite things. Religions that claim they're true, don't get me started. Standards that double and people cold-hearted. Judgment and bias when freedom don't ring. These are a few of my least favorite things. All the lying, all the killing. When I'm depressed and sad, I add that to all of my least favorite things, and then I feel really bad. Feel like Julie Andrews or something.